of the Gulag No Project, Vladimir OSECHKIN, comes in direct contact with us as part of our broadcast. Yes, Vladimir, I welcome you. Hello. Hello, Vadim. Greetings to all our dear viewers and subscribers. I would like to say good evening or good night, but it is obvious that there is nothing good when there are hundreds of drones and WAVs in the air, which are striking right at these minutes, and obviously people will die. Therefore, yes, I welcome everyone. Hello? You warned a few days ago, when we were talking, you warned that a massive blow would be struck, that preparations were being made for this. Those units that are responsible for strategic aviation are also being prepared. Here is what is known at the moment, what commands they receive, and whether it is possible to assume how long Russia will carry out such an intense shelling. Unfortunately, it is there that we cannot publish the real plans that are available today in the main directorate of the General Staff, and in the United Group of Troops, of course, for obvious reasons. But information is leaking out. Those people who are inside the system and do not agree with what has been happening over the past few weeks report that the agreed plans to deplete the Ukrainian air defense system with drones are just WAVs, so that at some point, when military intelligence in Russia receives data that there is nothing left to protect the sky, more serious and massive airstrikes will already be carried out. Unfortunately, I have no optimism from what is happening, because we see the toothlessness, spinelessness of many well-known politicians who imagine themselves to be the strongest of this world, to the last, who gave great hopes to Ukraine, and to those people who are generally worried about what is happening, and were waiting for the end of the bloodshed. Unfortunately, absolutely nothing has been done for this. The same Donald Trump today posts some funny photos of a swan biting Mr. Stephen Witkoff on the golf course, that is, a man who has been stirring the minds of journalists following the agenda for the past few months, writing, Stephen Witkoff flew there, flew here, met with those who play golf, they have everything is pretty good there in principle. At this time, a bloody war continues, and, as I have already said, Putin's task now is to further capture more and more territories of Ukraine, destroy enemy manpower. And, unfortunately, taking into account the quality of weapons in Russia and the level at which intelligence works, it is clear that some of the strikes and missiles and bombs hit civilians. People are dying. And it's like, yes, from the point of view of international law, civilians are dying, but for me personally, there is no difference between civilian and military. Many Ukrainian soldiers, soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine today, are those who a year or 2 or 3 ago were doctors, teachers, road workers, and so on, the most ordinary people who today defend the territory of their country with weapons in their hands, so that the Gulag space of the 21st century does not spread to its territory to the border of Poland. Therefore, of course, here my words of support in Ukraine have already been inflicted on a number of regions, and terrible blows will continue to be inflicted during these hours. Therefore, of course, words of support to all Ukrainians, forces, rescuers, and doctors who will go to the place, in order to extract someone from under the rubble, rescue someone, resuscitate someone right on the way to the hospital. And of course, the air defense forces as much as possible. In my opinion, these months of expectations, they led to the fact that the West significantly reduced the number of deliveries of air defense systems to Ukraine on the eve of negotiations, expectations of some positive, instead of increasing supplies and protecting, closing the skies of Ukraine from these attacks. At that time, Putin was building up strike forces, strike groups. And now all their tactics, what they are doing, they are depleting the air defense systems so that at some certain point, when they fix that they can't shoot down WAVs anymore, much more dangerous and damaging missiles and bombs will fly further. The fact that there was information, which was announced by the commander of one of the air defense divisions, that Putin was in the epicenter of repelling the Ukrainian attack, as it was designated. There is an interesting detail there that, for example, Putin's chronicler, journalist, Kommersant columnist Andrei Kolesnikov said that Putin moved by car, not by helicopter. But nevertheless it was voiced. Propaganda is now publishing it with might and main, deciphering it, and so on. Why was this done, and what is known about this episode, if it took place at all? Well, as for how Putin moves, routes and 3 helicopters are being prepared at the same time, which fly one after the other, so that no one knows in which helicopter the dictator is flying. And at the same time, there are also 2 tuples that can move in parallel. Helicopters can fly, cars can go, and no one knows exactly where, in what vehicle, in what type of transport the dictator is. He is very much afraid. He has been reinsuring himself for more than 10 years, even more than 15 years. By the way, yes, in this part of the EFSO works quite effectively, protecting it. However, why do they take care of him when he has already killed hundreds of thousands of Russians? Big question. As for the overall situation, they are now, of course. Well, let's talk about the most important of recent events. The largest exchange in the history of the war has been completed. The Istanbul agreements have been fulfilled. Thousands of Ukrainians have returned to Ukraine. Thousands of Russians should, in theory, return through Belarus to the territory of the Russian Federation. More than 800 servicemen from both sides and civilians. And now Rus propaganda and state human rights defenders are active there in Russia, not independent. But those who are such human rights operatives, they are now conducting a large-scale campaign there in order to present this exchange as such an internal victory, an internal achievement of Putin and the negotiating group, and so on. That is. And, of course, the returning residents of the Kursk region occupy a special place there. There is heroization, victimization, and so on. And in general, in the minds of those who watch Rus propaganda. And these are not only those who live inside the perimeter of the Russian Federation. These are those who can even live in a neighboring house in Europe, inspect some kind of Rush Today or something else from all of this. Here they introduce the equation into consciousness. They equalize the aggressor and the victim. They equalize Russia and Ukraine with thousands upon thousands of exchanges like this. In general, the media are actively working, and political strategists and Putin's per-agencies, which receive very large sums of money in order to put an equal sign around the world and say they're Trump. Witkow, and everyone else calm down, go play golf, and so on. Let them sort it out among themselves here. This is the anxiety and danger of the situation, and in my opinion, of course, it is a wild injustice. Because what is happening, and has been happening in Russia with prisoners of war in recent years, and what is happening to Russians in Putin's dungeons is, of course, a terrible crime against humanity. At night, looking of course, I will not tell our esteemed viewers and female viewers the details and details. We talked about it a lot, and there is no gulag on the channel, and you have live broadcasts of what happened and is happening there. But now there is an active work of Russian propaganda, the Russian authorities, in order to win a certain amount of empathy. Sympathy in different countries of the world, equalize Ukraine and Russia, and, of course, we can support for Ukraine in many ways. Plus, we see attacks going on. The hybrid war is already continuing on the territory of the European Union. A few months ago, we actively discussed how ships connected with Russia are tearing cables at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, including. A week ago and a few days ago, there were power outages in Spain, first of all, then mobile communications. And for the last 2 days, the power system in France has also been hit, first of all in the place where the Cannes Festival is held, where a large number of public opinion leaders have gathered today and these days. And, of course, it's all very depressing. And this suggests that Putin's regime is a danger not only for Ukraine. This is very important to understand. There were reports that Tu-95 MiS strategic bombers took off. The number of boards is being specified now, but monitoring services are already recording the takeoff of these aircraft that carry cruise missiles. Yes, there is not only the 95th. There are now Tu-22 M3, either have risen or will rise into the air and can lift to 160. In general, for the last few days, as I have already said, they regularly, almost daily, receive a command to bring. A ghost is not in the sense of some kind of horror, some kind of ghost, some kind of Casper will fly somewhere. No, and we are talking about putting on alert, including with very serious suspensions that can take away a large number of human lives, ballistics and everything else. And in general, I am not a supporter of some kind of alarmization. I am not an alarmist myself. And I urge others to behave with restraint with this information. But Putin has the whole palette of shock missiles, and he considers them depending on what goals he sets for himself. And the General Staff is considering these means with which they will hit the territory of Ukraine. And this is actually the 4th year it has been happening. And so far we have this side, on this side of the front line. I'm talking about the Western world now. The main person in this collective West is playing golf. Regarding the exchange, I would like to clarify the information, because there were reports that in exchange, the Azov fighters were not included in the exchange list. Here's what we know about this and do them the basics, shall we say, not traded now. A very painful topic. If I may, I will take a break for literally 1 or 2 days to double-check the information that we have, because in general, there are a large number of those, both military personnel and those who were captured in May of the 22nd year. I am not ready to comment on what kind of units they are related to, for one simple reason. Because many of them were passed through torture chambers, through press huts, in order to get testimony out of them, so that they would stipulate to themselves that they were from Azov. Not everyone has returned from captivity. So if we say now about some group of servicemen, here they are from Azov, and accordingly those who are now in captivity and who continue to be beaten and try to beat testimony out of them, this may worsen their situation. So, sorry, here in this case, not even just to double-check the information and carefully analyze me, and consult with our colleagues from Ukraine, more than is published by the coordinating headquarters for the exchange of prisoners and those who, one way or another, regularly go to exchanges, including Vladimir Zokin, who was on the air with you, and Dmitry Karpenko. I probably won't take on some kind of courage and give out more information than the Ukrainian country itself publishes. Dmitry Muratov, Nobel laureate, editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta, today published a video, a very strong video, in which he called, including for the exchange of civilians. And this video is published. There he names, among other things, those judges and prosecutors who sentenced prisoners of war in Russia. He paid a lot of attention to the case of Victoria Roshina in his speech, and he was just talking about it. He said that soon Russia will celebrate the Day of the Punisher and called for an exchange, that release, exchange, no matter how to formulate it. Just as he says, Those who are for the Russian world in Ukraine, let's exchange for those who are in Russia now. Strong video, I recommend it to everyone. Dmitry Muratov, who is in Moscow, lives in Moscow, speaks very strong words, very well. Listen, I'm not even going to retell it. By the way, after I wrote Dmitry Andreevich messages about this to Goosebumps. And his call, have you seen this video? I didn't watch the video itself, carefully read the text transcript, and read what they think and write about it in Ukraine. With all due respect to Muratov, and to Novaya Gazeta, and to all that he has done and continues to do, here is the only rational question. Ukraine today has a large number, thousands and thousands of soldiers and civilians are being held captive in Russia. Therefore, it is probably not even possible, it is absolutely certain that for the coordination headquarters, for the GUR, for the President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky, task number 1, number 2, number 3 and 33, is to pull out their people, citizens of Ukraine, and not Russian political prisoners firm behind the walls of the Gulag of the 21st century. It's just here, but Dmitry Muratov needs to understand, and everyone who has heard this beautiful idealistic proposal needs to get down to earth. Who in Ukraine today of the responsible persons will think about the exchange, and most importantly, the legal grounds? It is one thing if we are talking now about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, European countries, the United States of America, some other exchanges between the Western world and the Russian Federation, there, probably, yes. Liberation fits quite logically into the agenda. But if we're talking about the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, of course, Ukrainian war are now fighting and taken prisoner of someone. They will be exchanged in order to pull her, his sister, their colleagues, their fellow citizens, and not the Russian political prisoners. It's just as if, in my opinion, it lies on the surface, and that's what I read today on the internet from many Ukrainians. Therefore, with all due respect to Dmitry Muratov's proposal, it seems to me that it is probably necessary to exchange efforts, not with Ukraine in the first place for this, but with Europe and the United States of America. And those also have, of course, their own vision of this current situation. Therefore, the fate of Russian political prisoners is, of course, immensely sad. Because a huge number of people suffered because of their honest position, because they are against the war, but de facto, some force that would fight for them and pull out, besides themselves, members of the Russian opposition, several media, but de facto not really today. Perhaps, yes, there will be some kind of exchange, but it will not be an exchange that is associated with prisoners of war. It will be rather there the story is possible there. Similar to what we saw in August 2024 year. And then, unfortunately, yes, there is how it all happened, and how it all happened, how it was all served, and how the rescued themselves reacted as a result of that exchange when some of them, sitting at the first press conference, said that in principle they did not want to exchange and did not want to leave Russia, that they were almost forcibly brought. So they were forced to receive European documents and so on. The big question is whether it will be in the very near future. Dmitry Muratov in this speech says that in Russia, in fact, he says that fascism has come to Russia. This ceremony has ended. Russia has become a country where fascism has won. Well, yes, and everything there is black is white, white is black. This is the country of such a victorious looking-glass. I have read what my colleagues write and declare there once upon a time, a long time ago, they were my colleagues, more than 10 years ago. Fortunately, those times are not that. I don't know, fortunately, not fortunately, but they have passed. And we now live in different worlds and look at what is happening in different ways. But the Russian state defenders are pro-Putin. They were not even afraid and did not hesitate at all. As a result of this exchange, they said that about 100 political prisoners were released from Ukraine and returned to Russia. In other words, you can imagine that those people who are now in human rights positions in Russia, they have now become such mouthpieces of propaganda, and for them black is white, white is black. They lie without blinking an eye and set up a huge number of the population and those who watch Rus propaganda in many countries of the world. Unfortunately, the audience of Russian propaganda is many times larger than such independent channels as yours, as there is no gulag, and so on. And about, once again, if we go back to what Dmitry Muratov said about fascism, well, yes, unfortunately. They all realized it now in 2025 year, and when we talked in 2021 year, that concentration camps were created in which Russians themselves are beaten, tortured, raped, killed. A lot of people thought that this was either hyperbole or an exaggeration, and so on. A lot of people cut corners back then, although we have shown that these torture conveyors have been created in a number of regions. Fascism did not begin in the 25th, and not in the 24th year, but much earlier, and already in the 21st year. Everything was clear. But, unfortunately, the world community looked at the archive of torture, was horrified, revered, outraged. And Putin managed to turn all this with the help of propaganda, even in some way into his victory. When they arrested a certain number of sadists, changed the laws and said, well, you see how great we have dealt with everyone. Of the 3 documentaries about Savelyeva's archive, about what we did, 2 did not come out at all. Something happened to them, with these materials and so on. And the 3rd one came out in a castrated, doc form, where as a result everything was turned upside down, and in fact, everything ended with the idea that, well, look, the laws have changed, the director of the FSIN was dismissed. Hooray! SSS stories, victory. Everything will be fine. This is some kind of devilry. They are very good at bribing, misrepresenting, throwing mud at a lot of things. And all this is happening now. Yes, but fascism did not begin in the 25th year. I think that here I have something to add to what Dmitry Muratov voiced. Thank you, Vladimir OSECHKIN, author and creator of the Gulag Project No, got in touch with us directly. Thank you, Vladimir. And until next time. Goodbye. Once again, let me end with my words of support to everyone who is protecting the sky in Ukraine now, to everyone who is protecting the peaceful civilian population. And yes, let's, friends, everyone in their place, do everything possible to end this vile war as soon as possible. And to those who will watch us from Russia, I wish everyone a speedy deputinization. Let's bring this moment closer together. Goodbye, Vadim. Thank you.